Much of the railway system we travel on today was built by the Victorians. They are as much the result of talented Victorian engineers who designed them as the vast number of labourers who built them by hand, using only picks, shovels and wheelbarrows. The navvies. Building the new railway system required the development of pioneering methods of construction and engineering in order to build the viaducts, embankments and tunnels required. As with any new technology, learning was by experience, but lessons were often learned the hard way, through injury and death. At one point, over 250,000 navvies were employed building the railways. They moved around the country from job to job, often descending on small towns and villages in large numbers, where the inhabitants were not used to seeing strangers.
Only 25% of the navvies who built the Severn Valley Railway were local. The rest came from all over Britain. There was plenty of well-paid and steady work for the railway navvies in the 1860s, but you had to travel from job to job. This was referred to as going on the tramp. Navvies often learned about work opportunities by word of mouth from fellow travellers. Many railways crossed isolated countryside, accessible only on foot. Navvies carried their tools and a few personal belongings. Their wives and children shared the hardships of life on the road, staying in cheap accommodation or sleeping rough in the open. A navvy wife remembers going on the tramp in 1847.
He took his kit, and I had my pillow strapped on my back, and off as sot, jawing all along. Us walked 30 miles a day, dead on end. It never stopped raining, and I hadn't a dry thread on me night or day, for us slept in such miserable sort of places. I was afeard my clothes be stole if I took them off.
Navvies lived where they found work. Their lives were hard, not only because of the physical labour, but also because of how they lived. In 1846, Chief Railway Engineer Robert Rawlinson testified at a parliamentary committee looking into the living conditions of railway navvies.
There were lodged in each room 16 navvies, and as there were only 4 beds, 2 navvies were consequently in each. The 2 squads of 8 men changed places with each other as in their work.
Navvies often lived in squalid and cramped inns or lodging houses in local towns. Many others stayed in huts with very basic facilities, shared with up to 18 other unmarried navvies. In modern terms, they lived off-grid. Navvy women earned income by keeping house and cooking for these lodgers. The huts often had only 3 rooms, one for the navvy family, a communal area with a stove and a table, and a bunk room for lodgers. Navvy children worked from a very young age to help support the family. Their duties might include cleaning or taking food and drink to the navvies working on the railway.
On October the 1st, 1859, the Bridgnorth Journal newspaper reported,
A boy named Benjamin Downs proceeded up the cutting for the purpose of having a ride, the danger of which had been pointed out to him on several occasions. However, while the wagons were running along at a rapid pace, he was seen hanging on, when it was supposed his foot must have caught in something and caused him to fall across the rail, the wagons passing over him and breaking his neck.
Unfortunately, accidents like this were commonplace, along with tunnel collapses and mishaps with explosives. Health and safety was not an important consideration for railway contractors or the navvies themselves. Completing a job on time was. Tiredness, alcohol, and recklessness among navvies increased the risk of injury or even death. A moment's loss of concentration could have disastrous consequences. Navvies often worked in remote locations, so the injured had to survive transport to the nearest town for treatment. A navvy died for each mile built of the Severn Valley Railway's Kidderminster Loop Line.
On the randy was navvy slang for going on a drunken spree, which usually involved fighting and, on occasions, petty crime. Sometimes a navvy lost all his money on the randy. Local papers provide many accounts of navvies being arrested for drunkenness and describe the court appearances which followed. The Kidderminster Times reported on a town council meeting in 1876.
Mr. Milnes drew the notice of the town council at their meeting on Wednesday, and it was not denied that there had been a great deal of drunkenness in the town, but Superintendent Haig laid the blame on the navvies now at work in the neighbourhood.
Going on the randy often happened on payday, when navvies spent their cash on ale. Sometimes wages were even distributed from a local pub. This clearly proved too tempting. The funeral of a navvy could also spark his comrades to go on the randy afterwards. Although drunken disorderly behaviour could impact on local communities, it was more often directed at other navvies. Town councils in Kidderminster and Bewdley considered closing pubs on a Sunday to reduce navvy drunkenness.
Before railways made travel easier, most people lived their whole lives in one place. Outsiders were viewed with suspicion. Railway building resulted in small communities being overtaken by large gangs of navvies from all over Britain. They had a well-earned reputation for heavy drinking, bad language, petty crime and immoral behaviour. However, navvies also faced prejudice, being unfairly blamed for problems in towns and villages. An account from 1860 shows this.
Magistrates Court, Tuesday. Charge of stealing 8 sovereigns. James Bradshaw, a decent-looking man who said he came from Manchester last week and was engaged upon the Severn Valley Railway, was charged with stealing 8 sovereigns. But no good evidence being adduced, he was discharged.
The truth was that many communities at the time already had existing problems with drunkenness and petty crime. Navvies made these problems worse, but they could also bring wealth to small rural communities. Navvies were well paid and spent their wages in local businesses, especially alehouses. Perhaps the navvies' worst crime was living a different kind of life, one considered less acceptable by wider society.